All right, another location. So the third one on Haidt's list is loyalty betrayal. And it starts with this idea that there's a pretty much innate human tendency to create in-groups and out-groups. Uh, there's various support for this. I mean, there's lots of social psychology studies where the experimenters put two groups, sometimes it's two groups of kids, sometimes it's a group of adults, but they put them in completely arbitrary groups and see what happens. And usually what happens is the kids end up bonding together with their group and trying to defeat or otherwise mess with the other side. Certainly throughout human history, from hunter-gatherers to pastoralists and agriculturalists to modern industrialized societies, humans tend to organize themselves in groups. Haidt uses the particularly absurd example of sports fandom, right? This is one where we build these arbitrary loyalties to someone who might to a group of people that we have no relationship with, except that they represent our team, and we get really fired up and we get really emotionally attached to how that team does. The most extreme examples, we get into fights at games with supporters of the other team, and those fights start with us jawing at each other about whose team is better or whose team is winning or whatever the case may be, right? And there's this, human attachment to the us versus the them. Anyway, think of the silly play acting of the Spirit Week assembly, in which we all know it's a joke, but we get really fired up about the seniors versus the juniors and so forth. And I think in even more serious ways, we really value loyalty in our lives. I mean, think of, I guess, the phenomenon of, you have to be loyal to your family, or the phenomenon of monogamy being part of this idea of remaining loyal. Or even what I find more interesting is this idea, and I don't know if you've been in friendships like this, but there's this idea that you can't pursue a romantic interest of your friend. Right? And even if it's a broken relationship, like an ex of your friend, is still sort of something that you shouldn't do out of an act of loyalty. So anyway, there's all these ways that loyalty is probably important to a lot of us. In terms of its political manifestation, one of Haidt's point is loyalty to the nation is particularly salient for the political right. Right. I'll use this picture of Trump hugging the flag. He talked about, in a tweet once about, how there should be jail time for anyone who burns the American flag. But he really plays up patriotism, right? It's a big deal. And he's not alone on the political right. And to give a couple of other examples, we have, a couple of slogans that were spawned, I think, especially in times of war: America, love it or leave it, support our troops. And both of these were sort of leveled against people who were critical of the war effort, as if that were an act of betrayal against the nation. Thus, you have to be positive and have to support our armed forces in particular. My question that I'll ask here is, can you come up with another example, other than what I mentioned, of how the political right really emphasizes patriotism? Now, to be clear, I don't think the right has a monopoly on patriotism, but I also do think it's fair to say that the right talks about it more than the left, and in fact, in some ways, the left is more skeptical of patriotism, can often be critical of patriotism as a maybe not so worthy or desirable attitude. I think you probably have seen examples where the left is critical of it. Think of the mocking USA, USA, USA chant, the way that's sometimes used by people on the left to kind of mock the sort of mindless patriotism in their view. So anyway, can you think of an example of either how the right emphasizes patriotism, or can you think of an example of the left being critical about patriotism that I didn't just talk about? So, thanks.